So if I were to tell you that Avatar: The Last Airbender found its way into the 2024 Mean Girls movie, would you think I'm crazy? Because you better stop. It did find its way into the movie. That's so fetch. Oh, stop trying to make fetch happen. Sorry. What's going on, everyone? James here with another real review, and today we're getting into my spoiler-free thoughts on Mean Girls. No, not the 2004 classic that I absolutely love. I'm talking about the 2024 movie musical adapted from the Broadway play by the same name. Now, thank you to Paramount Pictures for giving me the chance to watch this early in theaters for review. It was a packed-out screening, and I do have thoughts. The film is directed by Samantha, Jayne, and Arturo Perez Jr. It's written by Tina Fey, who also wrote the original, and again, the movie's based on the Broadway musical. So it's starring Angourie as Cady, Renee Rapp as Regina George, Auli'i Cravalho as Janis, Jaquel Spivey as Damian, Avantika as Karen, and Bebe as Gretchen Wieners. So the movie's premise is virtually the same as the original, with some creative liberties taken, some that work and some that just don't, and the music, of course, is going to be new for fans who have not even seen the Broadway musical. That would be me. I have not seen the Broadway musical, so a lot of this was a little bit new at the same time. So before we get into my thoughts, y'all, because I have some positives, some negatives, and if you saw my out of theater reaction last night, I was a little lukewarm overall on the film, so I will explain why. But again, before we get into that, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies, TV, and all the news in between. So if you do too, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, join the Real family as we venture to 50,000 subscribers. What a blessing. And like this video if you haven't already. Get loud in the comments below as well, and let me know, what did you think of the 2024 Mean Girls movie musical? Because I think it's safe to say the 2004 film is a classic. But will this one be a classic? Let's talk about it. So if you don't know much about Mean Girls, here's a little bit without spoiling anything. We're back at North Shore High School, y'all. Cady Heron is a hit with the plastics, an A-list girl clique at her new school, when she makes the mistake of falling for Aaron Samuels, the ex-boyfriend of Alpha Plastic Regina George. Her name is Regina George. It's a musical number where she says, "My name is Regina George," often. So yeah, guys, again, the premise, not too different, but there were some differences that, again, fell flat and some that worked. So let's get off on an optimistic start here and get into my positives, because I did have some takeaways. The very first one being, there are two standout performances that steal every single scene, and that's Auli'i Cravalho as Janis and Jaquel Spivey as Damian. They're best friends. They befriend Cady, of course, and use Cady to infiltrate the plastics like in the original film. But what's awesome is that they are kind of the narrators for this movie musical, and I guess that was the same in the Broadway musical as well. And I like that approach. I do like when they break the wall and speak with the audience, or speak to the audience. That was really cool, and it really added for a unique experience. But there's an electric personality found in both of these actors that really bleed through the screen. They're hilarious, they made me smile at times, and they even had the best vocals, in my opinion, throughout the film. Auli'i Cravalho, you might know her as the voice of Moana, and Jaquel Spivey is a Tony-nominated stage actor. So of course they were going to bring that heat, and boy, did they deliver. Now, that's not to say they were the only good things about the movie, because, hey, I thought that the Easter eggs and the nods to the original film were also pretty nice. And there were even some instances where my girlfriend tapped me and said, "Hey, like, that's from the original," and I almost missed it. So it's really cool that there are things here that will be just for the fans of the classic film. There are so many things that happen in the beginning and in the back half of the film that are closely linked. You even have Tina Fey coming back as Miss Norbury and Tim Meadows as Principal Duval, so their energy is electric. And something else was also electric between them too, but for the most part, I do like the callbacks. They're subtle, and sometimes they're just hitting you over the top of the head with them, but that's not a bad thing. In some instances, they definitely were changing the dialogue to be exactly mirroring the original. Not a bad thing, but you can tell that they purposefully broke off from an original cadence that was found in the 2024 movie musical and tried to match the cadence of the 2004. So at times it was definitely hitting you over the head with these references, but I didn't mind it because that original film is such a classic, so it worked. Pandering to me as a fan of the original worked. There's also an amazing cameo in this movie, so yeah, don't walk out early if you end up hating this rendition. Now, I can also appreciate that this movie musical really tackles a different core audience, and the demographics that it's going to be catering to, again, very different than my age group. I'm a millennial, right? I'm a 90s baby, so of course in the 2004 Mean Girls, I was able to relate to a lot of the elements, and there were some things that I even saw on full display in high school myself. But with this 2024 rendition, I could definitely appreciate that they were very inclusive in many areas for Gen Zers and Gen Alpha. There's body inclusivity among the cast and the students that we see at North Shore High School. They even use language that is heard in conversation with those age groups, and heck, even the way the movie opens and is filmed throughout has markings of Gen Z. And what do I mean by that? They literally filmed some scenes vertically in 1080 by 1920. Now, that might make or break the experience for you if you love cinema. It annoyed me, but I understood the intention. Not everything that was changed to fit a new target audience worked for me though, so we'll talk about that soon. But again, we're in the positives, so let's get to this next topic. In a movie musical, of course, you're probably wondering, does the movie music work? Well, that's a two-part answer for me, so we'll take the optimistic, positive part of that answer. Sometimes, yes, it does, and there are instances where I found myself tapping my leg a little bit and getting into the vibe, and yeah, there are some movie musical numbers that I'm like, oh wow, that choreography is pretty cool, or man, that's unique. There's one instance in particular where Janis, Damian, and Cady are sitting under a tree talking about the plastics and different cliques, and they get on the topic of Regina George, so Janis looks up and says, will you stop playing for a minute? And the camera pans up and it's a band in a tree together and they stop playing their instruments. I thought that was unique. I thought that was really cool. I wish there was more of that. And then other times, well, maybe this is a good moment to then transition to my negatives because, man, for a movie musical, y'all, the music and choreography on screen felt flat, sounded muted, and it was lacking a dynamic punch to really make it memorable. Even from the very first act, I knew something was lacking here. It was missing an element that I was hoping we'd find. Maybe the energy was a little too toned down at times where it should have been turned up. But for example, in Cady's scene in Africa, of course, it's very different than the classic film in 2004, but here she's singing to herself in the fields and talking to her mother and then running off, and they transition to North Shore. But it felt like there was an oomph that wasn't present, and unfortunately I found that to be a common instance and occurrence throughout the entire movie. There was also this inconsistency in energy among our cast. Whenever the movie felt like it was ramping up to a killer moment, the music and the acting was a bit too subtle. But whenever the movie was trying to build tension, bam, out of nowhere, we get hit with a huge musical number that left me thinking, where was this energy all movie long? Of course, your mileage may vary if you've seen the Broadway musical, so you might know what to expect and you might sing along. That might help. But if you're just observing it, if you're watching this for the first time and being exposed to the music, I started thinking, was this actually a hit on Broadway? So outside of the music side of this film, there's also acting that has to go into a movie musical, right? So I have to say, I felt there were two huge miscasts and performances that didn't necessarily hit for me. And that's Angourie Rice as Cady and Renee Rapp as Regina George. Not saying that they were terrible, but I don't necessarily know if they were the best fit for the role. And let's start with Angourie Rice. I actually have liked her in everything I've seen her in, like Spider-Man Homecoming as Betty. It's great. She's funny. She has deadpan humor that really works. However, to play Cady Heron, I thought that maybe she was a little too muted at times. She didn't leave as much of an impressionable mark as Lindsay Lohan did in the original, and I'm not so sure I can fault her at times because the movie is centered almost completely around Regina George, which is the opposite of the original film. However, in this rendition, the second half really tries to then shift the spotlight to Cady Heron, but the problem is we don't necessarily get enough time spent with her, and we are not getting as much character development as we did in the original film to make that transition from nerdy math whiz to plastic incognito. It's really weird because the movie snaps its fingers and the tone changes for this character, and I'm not necessarily sure Angourie Rice also nailed that moment where she becomes a full-on plastic. It felt a little forced. And then there's Renee Rapp as Regina George. She also played Regina on the Broadway musical of Mean Girls, so I understand why they brought her in for the movie, although I can't tell you I found her performance impactful. I'm sure a lot of people will love her performance, and that's okay. For me, though, it just didn't feel like she really embodied that big personality for Regina George. It was almost trying a little too hard in some instances, similar to Avantika's performance as Karen, where she was trying too hard to be ditzy. So again, Regina George is a character that has so much of an impact in the 2004 movie, but here, even when they centered her completely, I don't know, it didn't leave much of a mark for me. And at times, it almost felt like she was in an entirely different movie. She was acting with a bit of swagger that almost felt a little unwarranted due to the circumstances. And Regina George, again, her personality is supposed to be large, but I didn't get that sense based on what we saw. It was just based on what everyone said about her. Because in the original film, everyone talks about Regina George like she's the next big thing. And we see that based on her actions and what she says. But in this movie musical, it's just like she puts her glasses on and is like, "What's up? Yeah, I'm a big deal. I'm a big deal." And it just comes across as a little cheesy and hammy at times, and yeah, didn't love it. And then there are creative changes and liberties they take with this 2024 film that will make or break for fans of the original. For me, like I mentioned, there were some understandable differences. Not everything really was something that broke the movie experience for me. They changed Karen's last name from Smith to Cady, I think it was, which is whatever, that's fine. However, there were instances where they stripped away elements of characters from the original that I thought, is that as iconic as the original? Will that still hold up? And it didn't really work for me. And of course, they got rid of some of the controversial elements of the 2004 movie, like Coach Carr's scenes with the Vietnamese students, and they largely strayed from showing any cliques that involved Asian and Black students because maybe they wanted to be a little politically correct at times. And listen, I get it, you don't want to upset anybody else. I mean, there's even a scene where Tim Meadows' character, Principal Duval, where he says, "I didn't leave the South Side for this." He says, "I didn't leave graduate school for this." That didn't hit as much, wasn't as funny, and did they really need to change it? So there are times where I started to think, maybe Tina Fey wasn't the only one in the writer's room. And then there were pieces that were iconic in the original movie that were stripped here. There's even a certain main character story that is entirely changed by the end, and it had me scratching my head. Yeah, well, at least they still kept Kevin G's rap. That was cool. I gotta learn the words to that one. But y'all, overall, what did I really feel about the 2024 Mean Girls movie musical? It's not bad. It really isn't. I found myself laughing at times and enjoying some of the performances, especially from Auli'i Cravalho and Jaquel Spivey. And hey, there were some movie musical moments that I'm like, all right, they're getting onto something here. I just feel like too often than not, the movie sort of falls off by the wayside, and there are stretches where we're neither laughing nor getting into the music. So I think this will be good for fans that are in that Gen Z, Gen Alpha age range. They're clearly trying to make this movie for them, and that's okay. Listen, I'm a millennial, I get it, some movies aren't made for me. But I can at least tell you that there were some creative liberties, again, that were taken that didn't really land for me. And not all the performances were excellent. And I really wish that some of the performances maybe were better, and maybe they probably should have cast it a little bit better. I'm not sure here, but I do think that this movie had the potential to be a really surprising January hit. Instead, it's better than most movies you'll see in January, but that bar is pretty low. It's just a movie that I think you'll see on streaming one day and say to yourself, this does exist, and there were some cool takeaways. But hey, it's always a good time when we talk about Mean Girls, so I was at least excited to be reminiscent about the 2004 movie, and really thank God for my girlfriend giving me some of those reference points, and I'm like, that makes sense. So it does help tie the experience together a bit better when you do have that memory of the 2004 movie fresh in your mind. So there you have it, y'all. That's my real review of Mean Girls. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think about my thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's have a conversation down below. And hey, if you haven't already, hit the big red button, subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and like this video for more reviews like this throughout the year. It's only January, y'all. One of the best months of the year. Well, personally speaking. But otherwise, I know. Movies will get better. I hope. Alrighty, y'all. Well, again, thanks so much for watching. And I'll catch you at the next screening. And that screening will be I'll stop. I almost said the word they told me not to say in the intro.